Hello and welcome to Infrastructure Matters, the podcast dedicated to exploring the dynamic world of infrastructure, asset management and public works. I'm your host, David Jenkins, CE of IPWA. In today's episode, we're joined by Rod Balding, the CEO of Standards Australia. Rod shares how standards shape our everyday lives, from the water we drink to the buildings we design, and how digital transformation, AI and global collaboration are redefining the future of safety and innovation. We also discussed the renewed partnership with New Zealand and how Standards Australia is engaging the next generation of professionals. Sit back and enjoy an inspiring conversation about the invisible frameworks that make our world work. So welcome to Infrastructure Matters, and I'm delighted to have Rod Balding, the CEO of Standards Australia, with me. Thanks for coming, Rod.
No, many thanks for having me.
Now I'm going to start with an easy question first. Standards Australia, just for those listening, just in your own words, what does Standards Australia do?
Excellent. Nice, easy one to start. Thank you. I can answer that one. So Standards Australia is Australia's leading independent standards setting body. We work with a bunch of what we call contributors, so over 7,000 of them, to develop standards that cover everything that impacts everyone's lives, whether that's from construction to electricity to consumer goods to infant safety. They're all underpinned by standards, and they all come from the Standards Australia standard development process.
Yeah. And so our members would typically, and I know they are because I get the emails, our members are often asked to sit on these various different committees around the whatever they might be. Yep. Is it, in terms of getting those volunteers and actually getting people, is it a challenge? Because you've got a broad church there of people that you've got to engage with.
Yeah, look, really broad church. And I think the key thing to note is, and I've said this at a number of sort of our contributor forums and member forums, is without those people that volunteer their time, like your members, we don't exist.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that are really passionate. I think we've got sort of over 7,000 people at the moment, as I mentioned, that contribute, and they're incredibly passionate about the topics that they're experts in. But it is probably becoming a little bit more challenging to bring through the next generation. So whilst we don't have a shortage at the moment, if we look ahead and try and find the future talent of standard development and those people that are willing to give up their time, their IP, their expertise to sort of make good for Australia, that's where we are leaning into a little bit of a problem going forward.
I do want to get into the next generation piece, but just why would you volunteer your time? Why would, what's in it for you?
So I think at the end of the day, I sort of say this to my team, you're actually making a real benefit to people's lives in Australia. So whether you are developing a standard around the quality of water that people drink, whether you are developing a standard around the, let's call it the energy transition that Australia is going through at the moment, if you're an expert in those fields, you are actually putting that expertise to use for a tangible benefit to benefit not just yourself, not just your family, but the broader Australian community.
Yeah. I mean, look, and I've sat there with, and listened in conferences, people talk about, they're on the standards committee, TC 251, and and we talk about the numbers and this sort of stuff, and the sort of, unless you're really involved, you don't really, arguably don't really understand. Like, so do you think Standards Australia is doing enough around its sort of, telling the story behind these various different committees and numbers and what they all mean?
Yeah, look, it's something that we need to do better at, no doubt about it. So I've been in the role for just on 6 months now. I knew of standards when I started. I had no idea about the breadth of impact that they have and positive impact. I think you're right. The people that contribute their time and their expertise, they are incredibly passionate, often incredibly smart, but often incredibly technical in their fields of expertise. And I think with that comes a lot of conversation around TC this, technical spec that, and that's incredibly important, and we need that to underpin all our standards. But I think what we then need to do as an organisation is make those standards real. So how do we put it into a story that actually tells the everyday Australian, these are the standards that are helping their life, these are the standards that are protecting them every day, these are the standards that are looking after their family, their children, their friends, and actually take those technical specifications and put it into a real life story.
So it's the outcomes, isn't it? And it's telling the story.
All outcomes, tangible outcomes.
So how, I mean, it's easy to say that, but how are you sort of thinking about doing that? How are you going to get those stories out? Because that's the stuff that people are going to listen to and are interested in.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing we need to do is, as you said, it's the outcome. We need to make it real. So we need to make it We need to make it a story around people can directly relate to. We need to think about the channels that we use. And we're actually going through at the moment a sort of like a brand communication and marketing strategy refresh to actually turn our mind to that. I think we have been, to be brutally honest, I think we've been great at talking to the people who know us and telling ourselves the great work that we do within the standards community. We need to take the step to tell those great stories outside the standards community as well. And what that means is we do need to challenge ourselves about how we tell those stories, but also where we tell those stories as well.
So a membership body like ours, what are you looking from, how can we help? What is it that we could do?
So there's probably two things. I think first and foremost, there's a very big thank you to your members that sit on those committees, whether it's the sort of like the national committees or the international committees. As I said, without their time and expertise, we don't exist and standards don't exist. But the second thing I think, and I tell this to my team at Standards Australia as well, it actually champion the work you do. Be proud of the work you do. Be proud of the impact that you're making. And it's as simple as whether you're at a barbecue, whether you're catching up with friends, actually tell them about the great stuff that you're doing and actually make it real for them as well, so they know a little bit more about standards and a little bit more about how standards play a really, really important part in their life as well.
Talking about, you mentioned this next generation and succession. I know it's hot. We do have people, as you said, we have people sit on the various different committees, and we have, unfortunately, and we're very fortunate that we have people that sit on the ISO global standards committees. But trying to find people, succession plan is difficult, and in general, any membership body will be struggling with future talent, next generation, people into the membership, and also contributing their time and their efforts. You'd be no different. So what's the thinking behind how you're looking to do that, both from your volunteer army, but also internally as well?
Yeah, so look, from the volunteer side of things, there's a couple of things that we're doing. So the first one is we run a program called NextGen. And what that does is that's really looking for the next generation of those contributors to our committees. So we bring them in, we pair them up with a mentor who's been around the standard development process for a long period of time. We give them the skills, the experience, the opportunity to sit in on those committees, see how standards work. And then at the end of that NextGen program, I'm really, really pleased to say the large majority of those people then end up sitting on our committees and contributing in their own right going forward as well. That's what happens at a national perspective. There's also some global programs as well. So I've actually just returned back from New Delhi where the IEC general meeting was held. The IEC has a similar program called the Young Professional Leaders Program, where they do a similar thing with people from all around the world through a 12-month program to give them the exposure at an international level around what's happening from a standard development process in the IEC world. Again, great exposure. They get to meet the sort of best and brightest of the standards world, not just in their own country, but globally as well. And actually really, really pleased to say that our Australian representative was actually just voted in as one of the leaders for the program for the next 12 months as well. But then, as you said, it's not just the contributors or the volunteers we're looking at. We need to say, well, how do we attract and retain really key talent within Standards Australia itself? And I think we're doing that through a couple of reasons. One, I think we've reignited our graduate program. So we're actually going through the process now of sort of reviewing applicants for 6 graduate positions at Standards Australia. And that will be a program that takes people in and rotates them through the business for 12 months to give them a sense of the end-to-end Standards Australia business, and then puts them in a home in terms of the business area that they've chosen to apply for. But I think the thing that we need to do to make sure that we're attracting that really good talent is speak to the benefit of the work that we do. So whether that's speaking to the technical advantages that come from the standards development program, or speaking to the actual positive impact that we're making in things like critical and emerging tech, sustainability, energy transition, I think if we do a better job of articulating to potential recruits the impact that they can have working at Standards Australia, I think the more likely we are to get, the more likely we are to get that good talent and retain it going forward as well.
You mentioned there some of the big issues that are facing everyone: emerging technology, sustainability. Is there, and I can't, because I can't think of another word for it, but is there a sort of pressure from government to go, how are we getting standards for new technology? We've got net zero targets. How are we looking at standards for this? And what is Standards Australia? Is there sort of that pressure coming through?
Look, I wouldn't say that it's a pressure. I think there is definitely I'll call it an accepted urgency that's far broader than just the government. It's far broader than just the government, that we know that there has to be innovation and change for us to meet our sort of like recently released net zero targets as well. So when you look at how we're going to get there as a country, there is going to need to be a lot of change around energy transition, sustainability, and with that ultimately comes change in innovation. Whenever there is that sort of change or innovation, there needs to be some standards underpinning it. So we recently released a draft standard on battery storage to align with the government's rollout of the battery storage subsidisation scheme. Things like that I think are going to become more and more important, because whenever there is innovation, whenever there is change, you want to make sure that that innovation is happening with accountability and safety, and I think that's where standards come to the play as well.
Now, you've said innovation 3 times. Now, people would not link typically innovation with a standard setter. So, and I like the fact that you said that, because you also gave some, we just had lunch now, and you gave some really good examples of just of what your team is doing in terms of Standards Australia, not only raising productivity, commercialisation, but also innovation, and some great stories. Would you be prepared to share some of those?
Yeah, no, happy to. Look, so I think look, like all organisations, we're leaning into what does the future look like for us, and that's looking at business model. It's also looking at the use of AI, and it's looking around our own efficiency and productivity, as well as that within the standard development process. So if I think about what we're doing internally, we're challenging ourselves around how we do business. We want to be easier to do business with, but we also want to make sure that we're doing it in a safe and responsible way. So we're going to be challenging ourselves around how we use AI internally at Standards Australia, safely, responsibly, and with the right level of governance. But we're also challenging ourselves around the standard development process, because as you said, people probably wouldn't necessarily think that the standard development process is something that would sort of like link in well with innovation and sort of the use of AI and digital tools. But we're actually going through an end-to-end process and governance review now of that core standard development process, and that includes how do we use AI to actually streamline the process, how do we use AI to make the process more user-friendly for the people that are giving up their time, and how do we actually really try and shorten the time frame from a standard proposal all the way through to publication.
Yeah.
The other lens that I think is really, really critical that we need to look at as an organisation is how is AI used in the search, research and usability of standards. And we spent a bit of time working through this as a team, and the standards themselves are the foundation of everything that's going to come from them. So that's sort of like that 50, 60, 70 page, very, very important, very detailed document is the foundation of everything that we do, whether it's built environment or innovation that we've talked about around sustainability of critical emerging tech. But the thing that I'm very, very passionate about is someone as an end user having that 50 or 60 page document, it doesn't necessarily make it user friendly. So what can we do with AI to help with the searching within that standard? What can we do with AI that if someone's out on a construction site and they're looking to put together, it's a lace and brickwork, that they know that this clause in this standard, they can search it up and then it pops up. But not just that clause, maybe that clause can then be turned into a quick how-to video so it's in front of them so they can see. And then what if English isn't someone's first language? Wouldn't it be great that an AI you could click a button and that video and that standard then translates to someone's native language? So all the use of the standards is done in a way that is much, much more user friendly for the people who need them out on the site or wherever they're using them to buy a product or wire some sort of like lighting into a building and things like that. So it's really, really critical that we use AI going forward in many, many ways.
And that makes a lot of sense. And really interesting, but what's the time frame?
Yeah, if I knew, I think I'd be. If I knew, I'd probably be a millionaire. Look, so we're at the stage of actually coming up with a proposal at the moment. We want to take this through our own executive team, and then we need to share it with our board. But we are very, very convinced that the days of just being a publishing house of standards is limited. excuse me, I think we've been a very successful organisation in terms of developing, publishing and selling standards, but we know that that's not going to be the future. The push for free standards in places like Europe, the discussion that's happening here in Australia around legislated standards should not be behind a paywall is gaining more and more momentum as well. And we realise that we need to lean into this AI challenge and this usability challenge probably in the next 2 to 3 years if we're going to be successful going forward.
So let's talk about the business model, because volunteers contribute their time. You'll have heard this so many times, but contribute their time. You develop the standard, goes through the whole process, and then you sell it back to them. And as you just said, even just releasing publication standard is not going to be the future of what we do. You've talked about how you can make those standards more user-friendly. Sounds some really interesting stuff in that space, really interesting. And I think this will be music to the ears for some of our listeners. But what else needs to change with the business model? Education, partnering with other membership bodies to delivering some of that. What does it look like?
Yeah, so we're sort of working, as we work through this, we work through the principle of we want the right standards, and I'll use the word standards broadly, right? It's not just the 40, 50-page document, but the information that comes from. So we want the right standards in the hands of the right people at the right time. And I think to do that, we need to break down a couple of different barriers. One is affordability and accessibility. And the first thing that I've had drummed into me since I started is standards are not free. Now, they may be funded and they may be provided to people free of charge, but there is still a cost associated with the production of standards, whether that's the giving of people's time from a contributor perspective, whether it's the project management on our side, the work that's done to actually get it ready for public comment, publishing. There is cost involved. We need to explore how is that cost funded. And we need to explore that, have to have a look at ourselves internally. We need to have good conversation with government, and we need to have good conversations with industry as well to work collectively together to try and say, how do we break down that sort of that affordability, accessibility piece to standards, particularly those that are in legislation. I think the collaboration piece there is really, really important. And I think it is a three-way conversation. As I said, I think it's very much has to be Standards Australia led, and I think we need to think a little bit differently than what we have in the past around sort of the commercialisation of that IP and what we can do to actually maybe open that up a little bit more. But we need to work very closely with industry to acknowledge the input that they have into the development of the standards through their sort of time and expertise. But I also think we need to have some good, honest conversations with government around the benefit from productivity, quality, consistency and safety that these standards provide. And between those three parties, what can we do to try and sort of remove that paywall for the really, really important standards that are in law? The second piece comes back to what I talked about, sort of linking back a little bit to AI, and that's the usability piece. And we talked about things like the ability to search, the ability to have sort of like short videos. But I think you're right, there's an education piece that I think is really important, and almost a little bit of an implementation piece as well. So what can we do as an organisation, and what can we do with partnering with our members or nominating organisations like yourselves to help those end users of standards understand them, implement them and put them into place safely day in, day out?
Now, I know that different standard setters around the world are slightly different, but you can't be the only ones thinking about this. Is there other countries around the world that you point to and you go, that's a good idea, I think we should be doing that?
Yeah, look, no one has cracked it yet. So we all have very similar challenges. So we all have very similar challenges at our own national standards body level. And then there's also the same similar challenges at the ISO or the international level as well. So they're working through the same sort of thought process. I think the challenge is no one has been able to find the silver bullet. And I think we're at probably different levels of maturity and different levels of thinking and progress in terms of what sort of where we want to get to and how we want to get there. The other thing that's a little bit different between us and a number of other bodies around the world is we are very much currently limited and focused to standards development and publishing, whereas some other bodies around the world almost have the end-to-end standards life cycle from development, publishing, accreditation, certification, compliance, auditing, all the way through. That allows them to think a little bit more broadly, and as they think through what does the future look like for them, they're thinking through on a much broader sort of like range of offerings and services than what we currently are as well.
Yeah, okay. Now, we've got listeners in New Zealand, we've got our members in New Zealand. And can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with our friends in Aotearoa?
Yes, no, our very good friends. Look, so one of the things that I heard very clearly when I came into the role was that our relationship from a standards perspective with New Zealand wasn't where it should be. So due to sort of a number of different factors, different funding models and sort of some, I won't call it disagreements, but probably different points of view on things, the two bodies have probably drifted over the last 10 or so years. And what that's meant is historically we used to develop standards that were joint. So sort of an AS is an Australian standard, an NZ is a New Zealand standard. We had a very, very large number of what we called ASNZ joint standards. And look, given the closeness of the countries, given the closeness of the economies, given sort of the focus on sort of like closer economic relations, single economic model, market, it makes a lot of sense that those standards were joint. When those sort of differences of opinion arose, both bodies sort of went their own way and started either de-joining or developing their own standards. And that caused a lot of issues for people who operate cross-Tasman. Yeah. And so one of the things that we have just done, which is actually a really, really great piece of news, is we've signed a heads of agreement with Standard New Zealand where we will be looking to make sure we work more closely together.
And you've launched that, you've said that publicly before.
Yep, that's publicly came out. I was over there.
It's not news here first then.
News here first. I'm sorry. Yeah, it could be. It could be. Next time I have breaking news, you can have me back on.
We'll have you back. New news.
We were over there a couple of weeks ago now, and we had some really good conversations with them, and we've agreed to rejoin a number of the most critical standards. So those ASNZs will come back together to be ASNZ standards. We also have agreed to make sure that we are working together with joint representation on committees around the really important new standards for development as well. And then we've also agreed at sort of like a high level principle to sort of work more closely in the region around sort of like Pacific neighbours and partners as well. Excuse me. When we were over there, I was really lucky that I caught up with Minister Simpson, who's the Minister for Business and Industry over there. And he very, very much stressed to us the importance of the closeness of the relationship between not only the Australian and New Zealand economies, but the Australian and New Zealand standard boards as well. So I think there's a very strong commitment on both sides of the Tasman that we do come back closer together. This was actually announced in the Prime Minister's press conference when Prime Minister Albanese was over there probably 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Oh, good.
They announced this heads of agreement. So it's very, very much sort of like at the upper levels of government around the importance of the standard bodies working together across Australia and New Zealand and making sure that we are very closely tied from an economic perspective as well.
You've had a very busy 6 months. How have you juggle it all? Because you've got a business model that you're trying to change or look to make change, different ways in which you're communicating with your audience. You've got a broad church. You're, trying to rebuild relationships with our friends. Like, there's a lot. How do you juggle it all?
It is a lot, but it's a lot of fun. I think, first and foremost, I'm really lucky I've got a great team. So I've got a great team that are incredibly aligned with what we want to do. They've been incredibly supportive of helping me learn about standards. I come from an audit background, not a standards background.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
And they've been brilliant and really, really supportive in terms of helping me come up to speed with what's going on. But I also think that the thing that I find amazing is I've got a team that they all work at Standards Australia because they want to make a difference. And I think having everyone pull in the right direction with a really, really clear purpose of doing the right thing makes things like this a lot easier.
Yeah. And on that, too, you're an audit partner, a large tier 1 firm, did that for a number of years, and then you decide to got the CEO of Standards Australia. That's a big change. And what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, huge change. The thinking behind it was I got to a point where I was doing I was doing a bit of work outside of sort of the audit world in the not-for-profit space in sport. And I found myself very, very much enjoying working with the organisations that were not-for-profit, purpose-driven, member-based. And I got to the point where I thought, this is where I'm really passionate. This is where I'm really enjoying spending my time. And so I saw that as the next stage of my career. I wanted to do something very different, but very purpose very, very purposeful, purpose-led, member-based. And I was fortunate enough that in speaking to one of my clients who was another member-based organisation, they heard about the opportunity here.
Yeah, good on you. Now, I'm going to give you a 1 minute pitch. Okay, maybe 1 minute. Yeah, 1 minute. So for our members out there listening, going, "Oh, this is interesting. I'm sort of understand a bit more about Standards Australia. I think I want to get involved. I think I want to give you one of the committees. This sounds good." What in your 1 minute pitch to them? What would you say? In order to push them over the line, and say, "Yeah, do it."
So the first thing I would say is the impact that you make is tangible. So you're actually using your skills, your expertise and your knowledge to make a difference, not just to you, not just to your family, and sometimes not even to the Australian community, but to the world. Like you are actually helping change the world for better. Not many things that you volunteer for or you work for can genuinely say that they are changing the world for the better, but that's exactly what you're doing if you give up your time to help develop a standard. I think the other thing that I would say is you get the opportunity to work with some amazing people. And I'm not just talking about my Standards Australia team, I'm talking about those other 7,000 contributors from Australia that sit around those tables and share their insights and those expertise. You're going to be learning so much from the people sitting next to you around that table. And then if you have the opportunity to do it internationally, you're going to get the opportunity to not only sort of learn from the Australian experts that you sit next to, but share your views with the best and brightest from around the world on your topic of expertise as well.
What? Yeah, you've sold me, and I genuinely have. And look, I would just like to also just thank all the members that do volunteer their time for IPWA across all our divisions and branches. A sincere thank you from and I'm going to join Rod in this. A sincere thank you from us to you for contributing your time, because they're not, not your names aren't always up in shiny lights, but we know that you're doing a lot of work and we appreciate it very, very much. Well, do you mind because you said to me if you have you back, I'd love to get you back after a sort of another year, but I have to talk to Jess whether I can do that. But come back another year and maybe just tell us some of the things that, how they've moved along and all that sort of stuff. I also, we talked about this earlier, but there's certainly a commitment from IPWA to help in anything we can. We've talked about a few initiatives because we certainly want to be involved in your journey, which sounds like a very exciting one.
No, excellent. Well, firstly, would love to be back, so very much appreciate the opportunity today, but would love to be back and talk a little bit more about what's happened. But secondly, I think as an organisation, Standards Australia needs to be working very closely with organisations like yourselves. I think we have a number of sort of common goals in terms of what we want to achieve, number of common challenges that we're leaning into with sort of the changing sort of like world that we live in today. And I think that the closer we can work together and sort of like partner and collaborate, I think the better we'll both be. So very, very happy to.
Perfect. Well, thank you ever so much. Thanks for coming in today. Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Really, really enjoyed it. And you're very lucky because you're walking away with an Infrastructure Matters limited edition mug that's going to sit, I know, firmly on your desk when you go back to Bridge Street.
Pride of place. Pride of place. Excellent. Thank you.
And that's it for another episode of Infrastructure Matters. A big thank you to Rob Balding for joining us and sharing his insights into the evolving world of standards, innovation and collaboration. To our listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. If this conversation has given you a new appreciation for how standards shape infrastructure, consider getting involved as a contributor or advocate for smarter, safer and more sustainable outcomes. Be sure to follow us for future episodes, rate and review Infrastructure Matters on your favourite platform, and connect with us on LinkedIn for updates and exclusive content. I'm David Jenkins signing off, reminding you that in the world of infrastructure, every detail matters.